They told me the Vatican doesn't have basements, but they lied. Beneath the marble floors and gilded altars, below even the catacombs tourists whisper about, there is another layer, a place without stained glass or saints, a place where no prayers are heard and no sunlight has ever touched. I first saw it on a night when the rain turned the streets into black rivers, the air thick with the smell of wet stone, and something sharper, like copper, like blood left too long in the air. For 3 months I thought my work was simple. Night patrol, guarding relics and archives from thieves, walking endless corridors while the city slept, until Father Benedetto, a man whose eyes seemed centuries older than his face, stopped me in the dark and handed me a thick leather folder. Inside were 5 rules, written in Italian, Latin, English, and languages I could not even begin to name, and he made me read them aloud 3 times, the words sinking into my voice like an oath I could never take back. Rule 1, never look directly at their faces. Rule 2, always announce yourself before entering any room. Rule 3, no physical contact. Keep at least 2 meters away at all times. Rule 4, speak only when spoken to. Answer with yes or no. Rule 5, never turn your back on more than one at a time. I tried to laugh, but Benedetto didn't, and his voice was so low I almost missed the words. These rules exist because those who break them do not survive. That night I took my post outside a conference hall that doesn't appear on any map, and at midnight they arrived, not saints or priests, not the kind of guests I'd been told to expect. I heard them first. Footsteps that sounded human, and others that didn't, some moving with the quiet rhythm of leather shoes polished to mirrors, others barefoot with nails clicking against the stone, and one pair that shimmered in the dim light covered. In scales that caught each breath of shadow, I kept my eyes locked on the floor just as I'd been told, and when I greeted them, most ignored me, but one spoke a single word in a language I couldn't name, and the sound of it made my ribs ache as if it had weight. That was the moment I understood. Whatever met in that room was not here for worship. They were here for something older, something the church had buried for centuries but never destroyed, and tonight I was going to learn why. The first night I worked one of these gatherings, I thought the rules were simply a formality, but the Vatican does not waste ink on superstition. And by the end of that shift, I would understand that every line was written in blood. I stayed at my post outside the great wooden doors, their surface carved with symbols I didn't recognize, and the air in the corridor felt heavier with each minute, like I was standing too close to the edge of something deep and endless. They passed me in silence, moving toward the room, some with the easy grace of diplomats, others with the strange stiffness of someone wearing a body for the first time, and I caught small details, sandals bound with dark fabric, bare skin so pale it almost glowed, and in one case, feet covered in fine, glistening scales that shifted with every step. I greeted each group in the same way, my voice steady, my eyes never lifting past the ankles, and most ignored me entirely, but a few replied in words that didn't sound like any language of earth, their voices layered as if 2 or 3 people spoke at once through the same mouth. The meeting lasted exactly 4 hours, the air pressing colder with every passing moment, and I walked my patrol through the adjacent halls, checking doors, noting temperatures, and listening for sounds that didn't belong. Twice I encountered attendees away from the main room, and twice I followed the rules to the letter, announcing my presence clearly, waiting for acknowledgement before moving, never crossing the distance without invitation. The first stood at a tall window, staring into the gardens that now seemed impossibly still, and when I called out, it turned just enough for me to glimpse more toes than a human should have. Its voice soft, saying only, "Security patrol noted," before looking away again. The second time I heard the voice from inside a restroom stall, wearing my announcement with "Acknowledged, guard," and the sound was like two people speaking in perfect unison, one male, one female breathing as one. By dawn, they began to leave, their footsteps fading like the tide pulling back from the shore. But the one with the scaled feet paused beside me, and in a voice that came from somewhere far above my head, it said, "You follow instructions well." Father Benedetto chose wisely. I didn't move, didn't look up, just answered, "Thank you." And when they were gone, Benedetto appeared with coffee asking for my report. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I was not guarding them. I was guarding the world from them. The months that followed taught me the truth slowly, piece by piece, as if the Vatican wanted me to adapt to the weight of it, because knowing too much too fast might crush a man before he could be useful. Patterns emerged in the arrivals. The same leather shoes always came first, always left last, never speaking unless spoken to. Moving with the precision of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. The clicking toenails came second. Quick, nervous steps like an animal, aware of a predator, and the scaled feet. They came whenever they wished, and when they did, the air seemed to bend around them. I learned to recognize them by the way the air changed, not just the sounds they made, but the temperature drops, the static in the air that made the hair on my arms rise, and the faint smell, like old incense mixed with iron. Sometimes, during the meeting, doors that were always locked would stand open without a sound, revealing corridors that should have led nowhere. Condensation would bead on the inside of windows, though the night was dry, and the old elevator would move between floors with no passengers visible, but the soft creak of the cables would follow me for minutes after it stopped. The rules were not suggestions, and I saw proof of that when they assigned me a partner, a man named Salvatore. Tall, confident, the kind of guard who thought he'd seen it all. He read the rules and laughed, called it theater for the wealthy and bored. His first patrol with me was his last because he made the mistake of speaking to one of them without announcing himself, and the thing turned toward him. Slow, deliberate, and whatever Salvatore saw in that face took the blood from his skin, his lips trembling as he stumbled back, whispering apologies he couldn't finish. I stepped in, announced both of us, requested permission to continue, and the voice that answered was deep enough to shake the glass in the windows. Granted, train your partner better. When the shift ended, Salvatore asked for a transfer to day duty, his voice hollow, and when I pressed him to tell me what he saw, he just said, "Rules exist for a reason," and walked away without looking back. From that night on, I worked alone, and the solitude didn't bother me, because by then I understood. You don't need another man beside you in a place like this. You need silence, you need focus, and above all, you need to remember that you are prey pretending to be a guard. Month after month, the pattern held. Arrivals at midnight, departures by dawn, 4 hours of whatever business they conducted behind those sealed doors. And my job was to keep the boundary intact, to make sure nothing crossed over into the Vatican that wasn't meant to, and nothing from the Vatican crossed over to them. But in my 8th month, Benedetto called me into his office 3 days before a gathering, and I could see it in his eyes before he spoke. Something was changing. He poured 2 glasses of wine, which he never did, and told me there would be more attendees this time, groups I hadn't seen before, and that the meeting might run longer than usual. But it was his next words that stuck to me like ice in the lungs. There may be visitors who are not part of the regular arrangement. He handed me a second set of rules, printed on the same heavy paper, but these were different. Refuse any message they ask you to deliver, no matter how polite. If you see a fight, call for backup, but never step in. If they offer gifts or payment, decline and report. If the power fails, use manual lights only. And if you smell sulfur or burning metal, evacuate immediately. Benedetto's voice was even lower than usual when he explained. Different groups have different interests. Usually they negotiate peacefully. Sometimes they do not. The night of the meeting, a thunderstorm rolled over the city, rain hammering the old walls, lightning throwing the hallways into momentary white fire. I arrived early, checked every backup light and radio twice. My hand steady, but my breathing slower than normal. The first group came 30 minutes early. Polished leather shoes, moving like they owned the corridors, but this time they stopped at my post. And the one in front said, "Tonight may present challenges. Maintain your protocols regardless of what you observe." At midnight, the second G. 1 hour into the meeting, the lights flickered just once at first, a subtle dip in brightness like a breath being drawn in, then again. This time long enough for the shadows in the hallway to stretch and lean as if something inside them had weight. I checked my radio, my flashlight, noted the exact time in my log, and waited for the power to settle, but it didn't. The next flicker lasted almost half a minute, and in that half minute, I swear the air itself thickened, like the space between the walls had grown heavier, slower, harder to move through. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the eastern corridor, the one I'd been told to avoid. Slow and deliberate, the kind of steps that don't belong to someone in a hurry, but to something that knows you can't stop it, protocol said to announce myself from a distance, so I did, my voice steady. Security patrol requesting permission to proceed. And the reply came from somewhere far down the dark hall, cold and absolute. Denied. Maintain your position. I stayed put, every muscle tight, the sound of the steps continuing, joined by something else, a scraping like metal dragging against stone, then a sharp tapping, irregular, and finally a faint sound like breathing, but too deep, too slow to belong to anything human. I could feel my instincts pulling at me to retreat, but that wasn't an option, so I held my ground and counted, just like the rules demanded, never turning my back, never looking directly into the dark, but marking every sound, every moment in my mind. Inside the meeting room, the voices rose higher. No longer a controlled debate, but something closer to a storm, words overlapping, some in languages I didn't know, others in tones I felt more than heard, and under it all, a single, steady rhythm, like a drum beat that wasn't coming from any human hand. 20 minutes later, the sounds from the eastern corridor. 2 hours into the meeting, the thunder outside slammed through the walls like cannon fire, and the power flickered again. But this time it didn't come back right away. For a full minute, the only light in the corridor was the dim yellow glow of my backup lamp, and in that light I saw movement at the far end of the hall. It wasn't one of them returning from the meeting, no footsteps, no announcement, just a shape, low to the ground at first, then rising, impossibly smooth, until it was upright, taller than any man I've ever seen. Protocol says you don't engage, so I didn't, but my eyes caught details before I could stop them. A curve of something like bone along the side of its head, fingers too long, curling slightly as if they were tasting the air, and skin that seemed to shift in texture as I watched. Smooth one moment, rough like stone the next. It didn't walk toward me. It simply was closer, as if the space between us had shortened without either of us moving, and the air smelled suddenly of hot metal, sharp and choking, burning the back of my throat. From behind me, down the other end of the hall, another set of footsteps began, slow, measured, and something in my chest told me these two presences weren't supposed to meet. Not here, not now. The shape turned slightly, and though I kept my eyes down, I could feel it looking at me. A weight in the air pressing against my skull, and then it spoke. Not aloud, not in any way sound should work. The words landed directly in my head. "You will not record this." I gripped my notebook tighter, said nothing, just breathed slow and steady the way I'd trained myself, and after what felt like an hour in the span of seconds, it moved past me, the temperature in the corridor dropping like a plunge into deep water. Seconds later, the footsteps behind me stopped, and for the first time since I took this job, I realized IW. The air between them was alive, the kind of charged stillness you get before a fight that can't be avoided. And I knew, whatever they were, they recognized each other, and not as friends. From the eastern end, the tall, shifting figure stood motionless, its head tilted slightly as if calculating, while from the west, the other presence began to emerge, one deliberate step at a time. The sound of boots, striking marble in perfect, almost military rhythm. The rules say never intervene, but they don't tell you what to do when two worlds collide right in front of you. I stayed still, my back to neither, counting in my head. 1, 2, 3. But every number felt slower than the last, as if time itself had thickened in the corridor, and the space around me had become a place outside the Vatican, outside Rome, maybe outside the world entirely. When the booted figure came into view, I saw the difference immediately. This one was clean, sharp, defined, no shifting skin or unnatural length of limb, but its face was hidden completely behind a mask of smooth black metal, featureless except for a single vertical line of red light where the mouth should be. They stopped, facing each other, and the storm outside seemed quiet, as if even the weather was holding its breath. Then, without sound, without warning, both moved. The tall shape didn't run. It arrived, one moment still, the next directly in front of the masked figure, its arms sweeping in a motion too fast for my eyes, but the masked one caught it, the impact sending a deep vibration through the floor under my boots. No voices, no screams. Just the sound of force meeting force, flesh that was not flesh striking against something that was not quite metal. The clash filling the corridor with echoes that seemed to stretch and bend before fading. I remembered the special protocol. Call for backup if a fight breaks out. The struggle between them was silent but violent, their movements too fast for the human eye to follow. Every impact made the walls hum, and tiny flecks of plaster fell from the ceiling, drifting like ash in the dim corridor light. I kept counting, always counting, because the rules said numbers kept you anchored, but with each count I realized something else. The fight wasn't balanced. The tall, shifting one was stronger, faster, but the masked one, it was patient, as if it had been here before, as if it knew how this would end. Then, mid-grapple, the masked figure twisted, forced the taller one back a step, and turned its head toward me. The red line across its mask flared brighter, and I felt the focus of its gaze land on me like a weight in the chest. "Guard," it said, not aloud, but in a voice that filled the space inside my skull, clean, precise, unyielding. "You will choose." No rule in Benedetto's folders had prepared me for this. No protocol for when both sides demand something from you in the same breath. Because as soon as the masked one spoke, the tall, shifting figure leaned its head in my direction and pushed its own thought into my mind, colder, deeper. Say nothing. The air thickened between them, but now it was thick between me and them, as if I had been pulled into whatever this was, not as a bystander, but as a piece of it, a living variable in a war older than this building, older than Rome, maybe older than the church itself. Choose. The masked one repeated, tightening its grip on the other's shifting arm. And I realized what it wanted wasn't my help in the fight. It wanted permission, a signal, an acknowledgement, something that would let it break the rules without the Vatican turning on it later. Every instinct screamed to stay silent, to keep my head down, to follow the rules. But the taller one was still looking at me, the shifting pat. The corridor felt too narrow, the air too heavy, my heartbeat too loud. Both of them, holding still now, their fight paused on the edge of something far worse, each waiting for the smallest shift from me. I thought about Benedetto, about the folder with its heavy paper and its rules etched into my memory. Never intervene, never take sides. But I also thought about the way the power had flickered tonight, the way unknown footsteps had moved through the eastern corridor before this, the way everything about this meeting had been off from the start. And then the thought hit me. Maybe the rules only worked when everyone agreed to them. And maybe tonight no one did. The masked figure's red line pulsed once, like a heartbeat in the dark, and it spoke again in that clean, cold voice inside my mind. Say it. The shifting figure's skin rippled, shapes and textures blooming across its surface like clouds passing over the moon, and the cold in its voice sharpened. Do not. I took a breath, deep and steady, and without knowing exactly why, I nodded, just once, to the masked one. The change was instant. The masked figure released the grip it had been holding just enough to twist its entire arm under the taller one's, locking it in a way that bent bone, or whatever passed for bone, at an angle no human body could survive. The taller one let out no scream, but the walls themselves seemed to groan, as if the building felt its pain, and the scent of burning metal filled the air so suddenly my eyes watered. Then the masked figure shoved it back, not far, just enough to force space between them, and in that gap, the temperature dropped like the air in a tomb, my breath coming out in white clouds despite the heaters still running somewhere deep in the building. The taller one's head turned toward me, slow, deliberate, and I knew without words that I had been marked. Not for death, not yet, but for a debt, a promise, something it would come to collect when the moment was right. The masked one didn't thank me. It didn't need to. It simply turned and walked toward the meeting hall, leaving the shifting figure in the shadows, watching me with the kind of stillness predators have when they're waiting for you to forget they exist. And I knew the rules weren't going to protect me anymore. The masked figure's steps echoed ahead of me, each one carrying an authority that didn't come from the Vatican, didn't come from Rome. It came from somewhere older, deeper, something that made even the storm outside seem small. The tall, shifting one didn't follow immediately, but I could feel it behind me, the way you feel heat from a fire without touching it. Steady, patient, letting the space between us stretch just enough for me to think I was safe, and then shortening it again, like it wanted me to remember. As we neared the meeting hall, the voices inside were no longer voices. They were a layered sound, something between language and vibration, too many tones at once for human throats to make, and it rattled through my ribs like the inside of a drum. The masked one didn't knock, didn't wait. It pushed the heavy doors open and the sound cut off instantly. Inside, the room wasn't what I expected. Not just a table, not just a chamber. The air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt. And behind the long table where the attendees sat was something I had never been told about, never seen in any patrol. A structure made of stone so dark it seemed to swallow light, carved with symbols that made my eyes ache if I tried to focus on them too long. It was not furniture. It was not decoration. It was containment. And the moment the masked figure stepped inside, I realized the purpose of these meetings wasn't negotiation. It was feeding the thing in the stone just enough of what it wanted to keep it asleep. The attendees, some in polished leather shoes, some barefoot, some scaled, turned their heads toward us in unison, and the temperature in the room shifted. Not up, not down, but wrong, like it belonged somewhere else entirely. From behind me, the tall shifting one entered, silent, its presence bending the shimmer in the air around the stone structure. And for the first time, I saw one of the attendees react with something close to fear. Whatever balance the Vatican had kept for centuries was about to break right in front of me. And I understood something I wish I never had. The rules weren't just to keep guards alive. They were to keep the lid on a war no one outside these walls even knew was still happening. The moment both of them were in the room, something in the black stone shifted, not visibly, but in the way it felt inside my skull, like pressure in the air before a storm, only this wasn't weather, this was alive. The carvings across its surface seemed deeper now, the lines crawling in slow, deliberate patterns, rearranging themselves as if they were trying to spell something out. But in a language older than words, every attendee had stopped moving, stopped breathing, their eyes, or whatever passed for eyes, fixed on me. Not on the masked one, not on the shifting one, but me, the only human in the room without centuries of pacts binding him to this place. The masked figure stepped forward, stopping just short of the table, its head angled toward the stone. "It's listening," it said, though its mouth didn't move, the words sliding into my thoughts as cold as marble. The tall, shifting one moved to the opposite side of the chamber, keeping distance, but circling, the way a wolf circles fire, its form warping in the edges of my vision, so that every time I blinked it looked slightly different. Longer arms, broader shoulders, something almost serpentine in the curve of its spine. Then from the stone, a sound, low, resonant, like the first note of a cathedral organ, but too deep to be made by pipes or air. And with it came an image, not in my eyes, but in my mind, a door, ancient and heavy, being unlatched from the inside. The masked figure turned to me. "If it opens," it said, "the city will burn before sunrise." The shifting one's voice followed, curling into my skull like smoke. "Unless you give it something else to take," and then it hit me. They weren't here to negotiate with each other anymore. They were here to decide what the stone would eat tonight. The masked one took a slow step toward me. Its voice sharpened. "Guard, you've already chosen once tonight. To choose again." The shifting one leaned in from the opposite side, the air around it cold enough to sting my skin. "This time, choose wisely." And every part of me understood the same thing. No matter what I said next, the rules were already gone. The weight of their attention was crushing, like standing between two predators that both decided you were worth killing. But for different reasons, the thing in the stone wasn't looking at them. It was looking through them, at me, the pressure in my skull tightening until I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Steady, slow, like it was no longer mine to control. And then the thought slid into my mind, not from the masked one, not from the shifting one, but from inside the black stone itself. "You will do." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a demand. It was certainty, as if it had already chosen me, and the rest was just ceremony. The masked figure moved slightly closer, not touching me, but blocking part of the stone's view, if that was even possible. "Offer it something," it said. The words almost a command, but with the faintest trace of urgency beneath its calm. From the other side, the shifting one let out a slow breath, the sound like wind moving through dead branches. "Or it will take you without asking." That was when I remembered something Father Benedetto had said during my first month. Not about the rules, but about the space we guarded. How every wall, every hallway, every locked door had been built with intention, layers of stone and metal that were less about keeping people out and more about keeping something else in. And now, standing in the heart of it, I understood the attendees weren't here for the meeting. They were here to make sure the stone was fed in the right way, with the right offering, so it wouldn't start hunting on its own. My mind raced. I had nothing to give it, no object, no blood pack, nothing I understood well enough to bargain with. And yet, deep down, I felt something strange. The knowledge that attention itself was a kind of offering, and in this room, all of it was on me. Maybe I couldn't fight this thing. Maybe I couldn't to run, but I could redirect it. I looked from the masked one to the shifting one, and then toward a figure at the far end of the table, one of the new arrivals I'd never seen before, whose boots had made no sound when they walked in. And in that moment, I made my decision. If the stone wanted a sacrifice, I was going to make sure it wasn't me. I shifted my weight, careful not to make it obvious. My eyes locked on the silent figure at the far end of the table, tall, still, its boots resting flat on the marble floor as if the cold didn't touch it. The stone's presence pressed harder in my mind, its voice like deep water. "You will do," but I pushed back, not with words, not even with thought, but with focus. I pictured the silent figure in perfect detail, the shape of its shoulders, the faint distortion in the air around it, the way its gloved hands rested exactly parallel on the table, too precise to be human. And then I imagined it instead of me. Something shifted, a faint, almost imperceptible tilt in the weight of the room, the way a predator's head turns when it catches a new scent. The masked figure's head angled toward me slightly, just enough to tell me it had noticed what I was doing, but it didn't stop me. It didn't want to stop me. The shifting one's gaze followed mine, and for the briefest second, its expression, if you could call the warping on its face an expression, almost looked like approval. Then the stone spoke again, not into my mind alone, but into the minds of everyone in the chamber. A low, resonant, "This one, The silent figure at the far end moved, slow and deliberate, lifting its head to look toward the black stone for the first time, and I felt something like static crawl across my skin as the air between them pulsed once, heavy and final. The boots scraped once against the marble as the figure stood, but the sound was swallowed instantly, as if the air had thickened too much for it to travel. It began to walk toward the stone unhurried, like it wasn't being pulled but was choosing to go, each step making the carvings in the black surface glow faintly, lines of dim red crawling outward in patterns I couldn't follow. The masked one stayed still. The shifting one stepped back into the shadows, and I realized I had just fed the stone exactly what it wanted, not a random choice, but someone it had been waiting for, which meant it might still come for me later. The figure reached the black stone and stopped, standing so close its boots touched the base. No hesitation, no sign of resistance, as if it had been here before and knew exactly what would happen next. The carvings along the stone surface glowed brighter, the red deepening into something that looked more like molten iron than light, and the air grew so heavy I could feel it pressing into my chest, making each breath shorter than the last. Then the sound came. Not the organ note from before, but something wet and dragging, as if the stone was opening from the inside. The center split, revealing a slit of darkness so pure it hurt to look at. And from that darkness came a shape. It wasn't a hand, not exactly. Too many joints, too many knuckles bending in the wrong directions, but it moved like one, reaching out with slow, deliberate intent, each finger tipped with something that wasn't quite claw and wasn't quite bone. The silent figure didn't move away. It leaned forward slightly, almost like it was offering itself, and the hand thing gripped its chest. No tearing, no ripping, just pulling. The sound was like fabric being peeled from wet stone, and then I saw it, something pale and shimmering being drawn out through the figure's body, stretching and twisting as the stone swallowed it whole. And then the boots were empty, the body gone without a trace, no smoke, no ash, no fall to the ground, just absence, like it had never been there at all. The slit in the stone closed. The glow faded and the carvings went still again, their lines settling back into unreadable patterns. It was over in seconds, but the silence afterward was worse, because every head in the room turned toward me again, and I understood the truth in that instant. I had just taken someone's place, but in doing so, I had put myself on the stone's list. Not for tonight, not for the next meeting, but for some night in the future, when it would remember exactly what I had done and decide my debt was due. The glow faded completely, and just like that, and the room exhaled, the air lightened, the pressure in my skull eased, and the faint shimmer behind the table disappeared as if nothing had happened, as if the last 10 minutes hadn't been the most dangerous in my life. The masked figure turned away first, walking back toward the shadows behind the far wall. Its voice brushed past me like the edge of a knife. Not all debts are paid in the same lifetime. The shifting one followed, gliding rather than stepping, its form warping into something smaller, leaner, before vanishing into a side corridor I knew didn't exist during daylight. Around the table, the rest of the attendees stood without a word, filing out with the same unhurried steps they'd arrived with, their eyes forward, their focus already elsewhere, as if the offering to the stone had been a routine, nothing more than an item checked off a list centuries old. Father Benedetto appeared at my side, silent, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to me without looking up. "You followed the protocols," he said finally, his voice lower than usual. "That is all we can ever do here." I wanted to tell him it wasn't true, that I had chosen someone, that the stone hadn't been tamed at all, only distracted, but I didn't, because I saw the way his hands shook, the way his eyes didn't meet mine, and I realized he already knew. The rest of the night passed in silence. At 4 a.m. the doors closed. The locks clicked and the building shifted back to itself the way it always did after a meeting. But as I walked my final patrol, I kept feeling it, a faint heat in the back of my mind, like the last ember in a dying fire refusing to go out. It wasn't a threat, not yet. It was a reminder that the black stone had seen me, that it knew my name, and that when the time came, it would open for me the same way it had opened tonight. Slow, deliberate, patient, because the Vatican's arrangement wasn't meant to protect the world from them. It was meant to buy time until it decided the world was worth eating again. And when that day comes, the first step through the slit will be mine.